Hello and welcome, friends and family, to the Educa DPS Podcast, where we strive to educate the DPS community. I'm your host, Javier Ibarra, and today's episode, we will be discussing the topic of teens' mental health. So, to start off, did you know that teens who suffer from depression are 2 times more likely to drop out of school, which is a scary thought here, and that statistic demonstrates why we're talking about this very topic in May, which is Mental Health Awareness Month. That's right. The information and the resources can make students feel properly supported, seen, and heard. So today, we're going to be talking and breaking all of this down and what mental health is, why it's significant, especially to our students, and how we can help them maintain their mental well-being. So joining us today, we have Kat Lovejoy, our bilingual community connector for the Denver Children's Advocacy Center. Her expertise in working with youth can provide us with information about how DPS parents and community can better understand our students who struggle with their mental well-being. Kat, thank you for joining us today. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me.
You're a repeat guest on the show, and this is the first time that you've been on the show with this new furniture. Is that right?
Yeah.
So welcome and welcome back. We had a great response from our last episode with you last time, and so we wanted to bring you back on to talk about this very important topic today. So I want to ask, what type of services does the Denver Children's Advocacy Center provide? And then tell us a little bit about your role there.
Yeah. So as a Children's Advocacy Center for Denver, our primary role is to investigate abuse and neglect in youth. So if there's a case of abuse or neglect in Denver County, we're going to talk with the youth and the non-offending family. That means the family that hasn't caused the harm, if it is a family member, to find out what happened and get the youth and the family protected. But a big piece of that is therapy. So in order for kids to overcome abuse and trauma, they need to be able to talk about and tell their story and then learn skills for how to overcome trauma symptoms. So we offer therapy to those kids, but also to kids who've been through other trauma that maybe doesn't fit into the idea of abuse or neglect, like maybe bullying or immigration trauma or witnessing a crime. Any sort of trauma that causes symptoms, we can offer therapy to those kiddos outside of the abuse and neglect sphere. And then the last piece that we do comes down to what I do, which is working alongside community members, leaders, community organizations to bring information on mental well-being to their communities on their terms.
These are huge and very important services that you provide for our youth. So I want to thank you for that.
Yeah.
I'm glad you specified, that you do more than just, for lack of a better word, like domestic type of trauma, but it's also like for our students here, we have a lot of new to country students. And so we as a society, we might not recognize the traumas that they have gone through because we ourselves haven't gone through. So it's important for us to provide these services for them so that they could also be thriving members of our community. So I want to thank you for that.
Thank you.
I want to ask, in your own words, what is mental health?
Yeah. I love this question mostly because we don't handle mental health very well, in my opinion, in the United States of America.
Oh, okay.
A lot of times, that was a big mic drop.
Yes.
A lot of times when we talk about mental health, what we're talking about are the problems with it. When someone hears mental health, even though the term should refer to stress, anxiety, my daily well-being, a lot of times what we hear is depression, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, right?
So
we think about it as a problem instead of mental health applies to anyone who has a mind, right? Anyone who has a brain, and we want to think about how well they are doing, right? And so at DCAC, we use the term mental well-being instead of mental health.
Mental well-being, okay.
Yeah, because the World Health Organization defines mental health as a state of well-being in which we can recognize our own abilities and capacities. We work productively. We can deal with and overcome stress of daily life, and we can contribute to our community.
That one's a huge one. I want to stop you real quick right there because my whole And I kind of, there's like a stigma around this, right? Like we think of like mental health, you need to be happy every single day.
Yeah.
You need to be happy and no stressing and nothing bothers you and you have enough resources to overcome anything, right? But if there are daily stresses, right? I think of just like traffic, right? Traffic is a daily stress for most people who have to commute to work. And in fact, it's a leading cause of why people decide to leave their workplace. It's because they have a very long commute. And so what are some of the ways that we can improve that? But here specifically, we're talking about students. And so it's the same thing, right? Students have to commute, right? Our students have to come to our schools. And so I have a question for you here. What is one idea about mental health that you think most people get wrong as it relates to our youth?
Yeah. I think the biggest piece is this idea of my mental health always has to be good, or we're not going to talk about it until I have a problem, and more think of it as how am I doing well, right? How is my mental well-being, right? And if I'm not doing well, that's okay. Let's name it. That's the first piece in feeling better, is saying I'm not doing well. And it's a normal part of life to sometimes not feel well, to sometimes have mental anxiety or stress, because things like traffic or responsibilities get in the way, right? And the more we can normalize this idea of I have a mind, how is my mind doing, the more we're going to not only be able to talk about it, but help ourselves feel better, right?
Absolutely. I think of like just a regular day, right? So like some of the things that our students, I'm trying to put myself in our students' shoes, right? So like maybe they're going through something at home, right? Maybe they are, maybe they're not, but let's say they are. And so they went to bed late, right? And then they didn't get a good night's sleep. And so, so then they have to wake up early because they have a commute to school or whatever. Skip breakfast because they didn't get a good enough sleep, so they wanted to lie in a little bit, and then because you have to prioritize, right? You're in a bit of a survival mode if you think about it. So you skip breakfast, so now you're late to class. You didn't sleep well, you're a little bit frustrated, you didn't eat. How well are our students going to be performing? Let's say they have a test that day, so then they have the added anxiety of that. And so I think when you start putting yourself in our students' shoes, these things quickly add up. And so I'm glad that you're on the show today, because for my understanding is we're going to talk about, how we can help our students and more than anything, bring awareness to these scenarios, right? That was just one scenario of many that I see our students, navigate every single day. And the reason why I use navigate is because some of our students, this is what they've been doing for a lifetime. Right. It's no longer, a trauma response, I would say. It's just that's life. Right. And so I want to be able to provide something for them today and through this podcast. I have call it a fact or figure. I don't read it to you, and then you tell me what you think about this. Okay. So here's what I have is researchers from the Centers for Disease and Control and Prevention say that 40% of U.S. high school students reported experiencing persistent feelings of sadness and hopelessness lasting 2 weeks or more in the past year. And so that's a 2016 national survey that says Children's Health found that 16.5% of U.S. youth aged 6 through 17, that's over 70 million young people, experience mental health disorders such as depression, anxiety, attention deficit disorder, hyperactivity disorder. What do you think about that? What are your primary ways of mental health issues that manifest in our youth?
Yeah, so I think before we talk about, before I answer directly this question, I want to back up and talk about what you just talked about.
Yes.
Daily stressors that our youth are experiencing, that our teens are experiencing, and how that affects them on a day-to-day basis so that we can help prevent just these bigger disorders that we're seeing manifest across the United States. And I think what has been helpful for me, I'm not a mom, I'm an aunt, I was an educator, is to understand what's happening for teens as they reach this stage of development. And so the idea is that students or kids between 9 to 12 are going through a huge growth or development stage, right? It's the same growth. It's not the same type of growth, but it's the same amount of growth as when they go from 3 to 6.
Which is huge.
Right. When they go from walking and barely walking, not talking, to like talking and having more social interaction, all that. Same type of idea, just different ways for kids from 9 to 12.
Okay.
That means that they are firstly experiencing a change in their brain. The part of their brain, the prefrontal cortex, that understands cause and effects, that processes emotion, that is finalizing its development. What that means is that they're still learning how I act is going to affect consequences, right? They're still learning I have these feelings. I'm learning how to process them, right? Then we talk about hormones. Nobody likes to talk about hormones when we're talking about teens, right? The idea of the hormones like estrogen, progesterone, that's going to affect their mood. So they're starting to have more mood swings possibly, right? And learning how to deal with that. Dopamine is increasing. So they're always looking for either there's debates. Either dopamine increases in their body or the sensors that receive the dopamine are more hyperactive. Either way, it causes them to desire more feel-good moments. And so they're walking through that as well. Their body's changing, right? They're starting to have more responsibilities. We're asking them to take better care or more care of their siblings or their parents. They have to start thinking about college, right? And then we think about all of the social or worldwide issues that they're subject to. So maybe something in their community that's happening, maybe something worldwide on the news, something they hear their parents talking about. And then we think about their identities. If it's an identity of a Black identity, right, they're going to have different stressors than someone who's white, right? A youth who's white, another added stressor. If it's an immigrant, whether that's from West Asia or Africa or Latin America, because of what we're seeing in the news, because of what's happening in their communities, they're going to have a different level of stress. So that's about 4 or 5 things or 5 ways that they are on a daily basis experiencing changes, which are going to cause stress, some anxiety, and all of that is normal. There's nothing wrong with them, right? It all makes sense. And so if we can start thinking about that, our youth that way of like these normal things they're going through, even if waking up and skipping breakfast, it's a normal good thing to learn how to walk through, but it's going to cause stress. So how do we support them in that? Before we get to what the study talks about, which the CDC and other organizations, I think another one as a university in California, says that the most common actual disorders that we see in youth are anxiety, depression, sometimes some suicidality and depression, insomnia, which is a surprise for me, eating disorders, substance use. Those are the most common struggles or disorders that we see manifest in youth today.
Wow.
Yeah, sorry, that was a lot.
you really brought me down here.
Sorry.
But it's good. It's good that we're talking about this, right? It's the first step in order to get to solutions, in order to navigate these solutions. I'm thinking about everything that you mentioned. I mean, it's almost all of our students, if you think about it. Just the normal things I guess normal, right? Normal subjective, but those are the normal stresses or normal things that all of our students are going through depending on their age, right? But then you add things like social media, right? And expectations there, right? You add the normal stresses of school, and what's going on there, right? And if you're a student with more obligations, for example, you're on the football team and the theater and you do band and all of that, each one of them is going to carry a little bit of stress inherently, right? We call it normal, but inherently because you want to do good, right? Because you want to perform correctly. You want to do good on your game, your recital, what have you. And so on top of they're still growing. Right? If anything, I want to give our youth more grace. Yes. Right? That's exactly what I want to do, is give them more grace, but also give them the tools to navigate this, because they won't be youth forever. No. Right? And they'll need to understand and have the tools in order so that they can navigate it themselves. And that's why I'm so happy that you're here. I want to talk about trauma and life situations. So based on your experience as our bilingual community connector, why do you think mental health challenges develop for so many students, especially those who are dealing with trauma and difficult life situations? Yeah. So I think about this question in terms of levels.
The first one is the one we just talked about, right? Every youth is going through either normal stressors that come with development or new responsibilities, or stressors that might not be normal, but that make sense because of where they're living, right? Like that stresses you out, it should stress you out.
Sure.
Kind of thing.
Sure.
All youth are going through that. And depending on hormonal levels, brain chemistry, family environment, that can cause more mental health issues or mental well-being issues or not, depending on the kid and the situation. From there, we have what you referred to as difficult life situations. A lot of studies through the years have used the term adverse childhood experiences.
Okay.
Which basically means they are what I would call stressors or situations that cause more stressors for the family or the child as they're growing up.
Can you give us an example? Because I'm trying to think.
Totally, yeah. So poverty could be one of them.
Okay.
Hunger could be one of them.
Okay.
Living in a single parent home could be one of them. Or we could get to things that are even more, we'll use the term traumatic or difficult, like having someone who's incarcerated out of the home, drug use in the home, or mental well-being disorders in the home.
Death in the family.
Yep. Abuse, neglect, things like that. And so the way I like to think about adverse childhood experiences is also in levels. So things like poverty are going to cause more stress. But if a child has a family that is supporting them, or a youth has a family supporting them through that stress, it's just going to be a stress that could affect their mental health, but it might not get to the level of trauma. Why? Because they have family support.
Okay.
But if we get to something that's truly trauma, abuse, neglect, right? Or a way that's less supportive for the child, that's where the brain is going to start changing.
To adapt to their environment.
Exactly. The brain goes from, and anyone who's going through trauma, the brain goes from normal processing thoughts, calm status to survival. And what that means is, again, my prefrontal cortex is no longer connected to the rest of me. It's turned off so that I can get myself safe.
Right.
So youth that have been through trauma are going to start being hypervigilant. Why did that change? Why did their face change? What's that noise? How do I keep myself safe? They're going to experience a lot more anxiety for reasons that are less. For example, if I've been through some sort of trauma and I hear a loud noise, my nervous system is going to react much quicker than someone who has not or can.
Right.
Why? Because I'm focusing on survival and being okay. That predisposes youth to things like anxiety, depression, drug use. A lot of times impulse control goes away as they're trying to feel better and feel okay. And then it also affects, the CDC reports that it affects health long-term too. Things like heart disease, cancer. So trauma kind of brings it a whole nother level when we talk about well-being for youth. Did that answer your question?
Absolutely. And it also terrified me a little bit.
I'm not trying to terrify anyone.
But it's again, it's important to talk about. In a little bit, we're going to talk about some of the things that our students, our families can do in order to have a best fighting chance. I want to say that like that. The best fighting chance to navigate these stresses, because they're going to happen, right? Whatever is, there's a saying out there that says life is 10% what happens to you, 90% how you deal with it. But if you have the tools, right, like you mentioned, if you have a supportive family, then poverty doesn't seem that traumatic, right? Because everyone's in poverty. That's how I grew up. We didn't see poverty as a huge stressor because everyone was dealing with it, right? It was daily life. And so it wasn't traumatizing. But now I see it in my friends where, like, I have a friend who won't eat leftovers. Like, he just won't do it because all his life he's had leftovers, and that was like a sign of poverty for him. Yeah. And so he won't do it. Right. Right. And I think he might benefit from some help here, because I hope he's watching. But those are just one example, right? Yep. I want to shift gears here to social media, right? A big one. It's been around since 2005 with MySpace, maybe even earlier with the chat rooms, right? Depending on when you want to clock those. 2009 was Facebook, and then 2014 was Instagram, right? And so me, myself, and I've lived through all of that, right? But I was always at the beginning of it. And so it didn't really affect me, right? I was kind of like, oh, that's something cool to do, but I'm still going to go outside and play with my friends. I'm still going to go to the movies. Like, it didn't really affect me the way it's affecting our youth now. So I want to get into it. So can't ignore the impact that our social media has had on our teams, right? We talked about this for decades now. As a matter of fact, in March, Meta, formerly Facebook, now Facebook and Instagram, which owns Instagram, Facebook, and Google, which owns YouTube, lost a major lawsuit where they were held liable for harming youth's mental health by designing an addictive platform.
Yeah.
So additionally, the Department of Health and Human Services published the Surgeon General's advisory. So when I think of Surgeon General, I think of like, the pregnancy label on cigarettes.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But this one has noted that several important findings, such as 95% of our youth aged 13 to 17 report using social media. So it's good to say that all of our youth at that age are using social media. Yeah. 2, or close to almost 2/3, use it every single day. And 3, children and adolescents who spend more than 3 hours a day on social media face double the risk of mental health problems, including experiencing symptoms of depression and anxiety. And so all of that, based on your experience, how do you think social media is impacting our students' mental health? That was kind of a loaded question. I feel like I was leading the witness.
No, I think it's important to name, and Beto did it in our previous interview as well, is that social media, it can be beneficial, and it's a part of our daily life, right?
It's a part.
You'll hear people say, my kids will never have a phone, and my question will be, or how do we walk through it with them, help them how to use it in a healthy way?
Sure.
That's a different podcast, right? I think it's very helpful. And what the Surgeon General warning is going to come down to, and what a lot of other countries are coming down to, is balance. And the reason for that is because a lot of the things I didn't mention in the development of youth right now are what predisposes them to addiction or mental well-being issues due to social media. Things like my prefrontal cortex is still developing. I'm still trying to understand cause and effect. What I see on the screen, what I do will have an effect, but I don't always connect those dots, right?
Sure.
Which can put me at both physical and mental risk. They have a lot of different mood swings, as they should, very normal because their hormones are changing. They're going to struggle more to process and regulate emotions as they're seeing it on the screen. Why? Because they're still developing that part of their brain, right? And so they're at higher risk of struggling with mental well-being because that's still developing. Then we talk about dopamine.
Which is...
Right. We all know that even for adults, dopamine is the reason that we are attracted to scrolling through our phones for hours at a time, because it's meeting the sensors that make us feel happy and feel good. Youth, as I mentioned, either there's discussion around this, either have more dopamine in their system or have more sensitive receptors, possibly both, which means that they're always looking for a feel-good moment, right?
Right.
And they
have to feed it.
Right. And the Spanish word I love is anhelando, like breathing it, like I need it, right? Yeah. Like, and so the idea is they need it, it's feeding that, and they have less impulse control and are more at risk of addiction to that screen. The last piece is sleep. Youth are going through a big change physically and mentally. They need to sleep more. Blue screens interrupt sleep, right? Which means a youth that's using their phone more and more may be sleeping less, which means their development is going to be delayed. So those are some reasons why we want to help kids learn balance when it comes to social media and our phones and our screens, in order to help them learn how to manage it well, but not fall into more anxiety, more depression, or just an addiction that we don't want them to fall into early on.
I have a question for you, and I want to preface this for our listeners and our viewers. I'm not an expert and I'm not a doctor, but I do interact with students every single day.
Yeah.
We are in our schools every single day. And so the role that I play here at Denver Public Schools is telling the stories of our students, right? To uplift our brand.
Yeah.
And so because of that, I'm inherently always talking with students. I have found, and there's a correlation, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong, I feel like this generation of students is a lot quieter, right? A lot quieter in terms of, I feel like maybe I'm just getting old and my generation was a lot louder, but I feel that the more time you spend on the screen, the more time you spend talking to yourself, right? And the more time you're spending talking to yourself, you're not really speaking out loud. And because you're not speaking out loud, inherently your voice is quieter. Is there any merit to my thesis here.
Also not a doctor or even a therapist.
Yes.
But I do think that there's going to be a lot of correlation. Let me put it this way. There's going to be a lot of correlation right now between COVID,
Sure.
between isolation, between social media and screens that we know is causing kids to feel more isolated, which may be more of a quiet moment, not feel like they can talk about what they're feeling. And we know that that's affecting mental well-being. So there is probably some correlation there.
Yeah, because I see it too when we interview like our athletes or people who are in groups or clubs, they're inherently louder.
Yeah.
And so maybe it's just a thing to look for.
Yeah.
Kat, I want to talk about, and we've been talking about challenges that impact our students' mental health. That's kind of the whole preface of the show.
Yeah.
Are there any specific signs to parents? We just mentioned one of them, but are there any specific signs to parents that they should be paying attention to in order to know if their teen is struggling? And if so, what are they?
Yeah. Super important question. And I would start with parents, caregivers, teachers, aunts, uncles, friends. Need to trust their gut, right? If I noticed that my friend, that my child is acting different, they're not acting like themselves. Maybe they're sleeping more. Maybe they're sleeping less. Maybe they're eating more. Maybe they're eating less. Something just feels off. That's a moment for me to come close and ask some questions. Not to say like, hey, what's wrong with you?
Right.
Right? But I'm here for you if you want to talk, anything you might need.
An example of that might be say, hey, I've noticed you've been sleeping a little more. Can we talk about it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Instead of saying, hey, why are you sleeping more?
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah.
Because that carries a judgment. And then the youth might feel like, I can't talk to you. You're judging me for sleeping more. Right. Versus,
and no one likes to be judged, regardless of the age.
Yep. Totally. Yeah. So I think that's a really good starting point, especially if we're talking about preventing some of the more serious mental health issues. Now, if we want to talk about symptoms of mental health issues that are kind of red flags we want to be aware of, I like to think about those disorders that I mentioned, like eating disorders, substance use, depression, anxiety. Anytime we start seeing a youth having a bigger stress reaction or anxiety reaction than is merited by the situation, like maybe they don't want to leave the house instead of I'm nervous about going to my game, or maybe they're having a panic attack about a test versus I'm anxious about my test.
Sure.
If we're seeing, again, those changes I mentioned in sleep or eating, if they're eating less or vomiting more, they're taking medicine for weight loss that we notice, more aggressive behaviors or more risk-taking behaviors, more substance use. I think marijuana is we need to mention, like if a child is using marijuana more at an excessive amount, that's something we need to pay attention to. And then lastly would be, it just left my brain.
It happens sometimes.
There's one more that was, I was going to name and I can't remember what that one is.
Yeah.
Hopefully it'll come to me.
Well, before we'll shift gears again,
Yeah.
I'll have another kind of statement and let's see what you think of this. So if we look at some solutions, right, because this is what I really want to get to.
Yeah.
I know that more than 70% of our student population is comprised of students whose cultures may incorporate approaches to mental health and healing a little different than what you would call traditional Western practices like one-on-one counseling, right?
Yep.
Can you talk to us about some of those differences that you've seen, because you do talk with our youth, and how can we take their culture and identities into consideration as we address their mental well-being?
Yeah. I love this question because I think a lot of what we do in the Western world, whether that be medicine or mental health or even education, is try to assign one size fits all. And when we do that, we leave communities, we leave youth behind.
Sure.
And so you just mentioned it. A lot of Western civilization is more individualistic. It's one-on-one. And the biggest difference that I see in interacting with different communities, and I should name, I am not a person of color. I'm not Latina. I'm not Black. And so I'm not an expert on this, but I do know that I have a responsibility to do the research so that I'm entering into communities from a place where I can listen and learn versus make assumptions. What I've learned in that research and in listening, and I'm still on that path, is the big difference is community versus individualism, right? A lot of Black culture and Latina culture is more focused on all of us versus me.
Yes.
I think about one of my favorite stories to tell or facts to tell is that the self-care movement actually came from the civil rights movement when Black individuals said, if we don't take care of ourselves, no one else is going to.
Sure.
And that from that birthed self-care, right? I think about healing circles. So a lot of orgs that are working with youth right now are using what's called talking or healing circles. which levels the playing field. Instead of one person talking to me about what I need to do and how I'm feeling, we're all sharing our feelings and our experiences and how we're going to get through them. I think about, and that's an indigenous practice, right? And it has roots not just in, indigenous practices here in the United States or Mexico, but also has roots in the ways that a lot of African tribes would be more egalitarian. And so we're leveling the playing field. Dance, music, food. These are all things that the Latina culture is really good at practicing well-being when we talk about carne asadas, right? Having a barbecue, or we're all coming home from school and we're all eating together. And so for me, what the difference there is not just community, but this idea of those cultures and me learning about those cultures, building belonging and identity. What the U.S. culture, Western culture wants to do is just build identity. We leave out the belonging piece. And so the more we as caregivers, as teachers, as adults in youth lives can focus on belonging and what that looks like in different cultures, the better supported youth are going to be in knowing that they have someone there with them that looks like them, or that at least has some understanding of their experience, right? And who they are. And those are really big pieces, I think, when we talk about mental well-being, whether that be one-on-one therapy or a talking circle.
A lot to digest in that answer, I think. And also, I mean, we could have a whole podcast segment just on the differences between individualism and community, right? When I think about like the COVID-19 response, I think something that didn't really land there is if we put your mask on, you'll help others. But understanding that the U.S. as a culture is very individualistic, right? And so how do we support our students with that? Which leads me to my next question. How do our schools and educators, how can they better help our students by including the culturally rooted methods that we just talked about in support and healing our students, and then maintaining a healthy well-being, right? Because I think of when I was in school, it was a lot of like, just throw some dirt on it, rub some dirt on it type of mentality. But it wasn't like that when I came home. And when I came home, it was very much like a community, right? My mom would call everybody and say, hey, this is what's wrong. This is what's happening. What do you suggest? And most of it was like actual physical health. We didn't really talk about the mental health aspect in our household, but that's because there were stresses everywhere, right? I feel like everything was a trauma response. How do our schools, how do our teachers, how do our educators help support our students?
That's really interesting, because even your story just kind of explains a little bit of it. Of at school, it was throw some dirt on it, like get through it, wait till I get home. And I think that's step number one is I wouldn't say teachers so much, even classrooms so much, but our education system needs to do a better job of including well-being, social emotional learning, making space for that, right? Because if I'm at school and I think, well, I can't deal with it till I get home, well, this isn't a safe place for me mentally. So that's a big piece of it. To me, a lot of my learning experience as a teacher and in this job comes down to my answers. So I think schools and teachers have the responsibility to, one, be aware and do some research, but to listen. So firstly, I need to know who's in my classroom. I need to know who's in my school. I need to know the identities. I need to know the cultures. I need to know the opinions of my youth, of my families, as a starting point for how do I talk to them about mental well-being? How do I guide my students and tie in, hey, did you know that in your culture, sometimes they dance, and that's a different way to help you feel, better. But I have to be very careful in that I can't do that research and then assume I know what those students need. Because those students, one, are individuals, two, typically know better than me what they need, and three, they live in two worlds, right? They live in the culture of their home or their origin story, and they live in the United States of America. So some things from their origin story or their home culture are going to be great fits, and some are not. And so I need a general awareness of who's there and what their culture looks like. And more importantly, I need to be able to listen as I bring that to the table and let them tell me what that looks like.
I think you hit the nail on the head here, which is listen. I think you would be surprised on how many problems and understanding and solutions you can come up with if you just stand there and listen. I think when I was coming up, I didn't really listen to our administrators or teachers or whatever, because they didn't look like me.
Yeah.
But the truth is they were there to help me, right? Because they took the time to listen and build the trust with me.
Yeah.
And then inherently I built trust with them because they listened, right? The power of listening is so amazing, I think, especially with mental health, because it's I feel like sometimes we just want to help. We want to rush. We want to help. We're so skittish on trying to provide a solution, right? We're solution driven and this and that. But sometimes it's like, well, do we even really understand the problem?
Yeah.
Do we really understand it, right? And I think you mentioned, talking about dance and food and music and culture. I think part of what really sets you apart as a person providing mental well-being to our students is that you took the time to learn a language that they speak, right? And it was Nelson Mandela who said, if you speak to someone in the language they understand, it goes to their head. But if you speak to them in their language, it goes to their heart, right? And so I think that that's a very important thing that I just wanted to point out from your answers. Now, let's shift gears a little bit here to our families, right? How should our families be involved when it comes to their child's mental well-being, right? What do you think our families should be doing to let students know that they are in a safe space that encourages open conversation about mental well-being without any judgment or pressure?
Yeah. You just said it. It's listening. And I think and you also said this, you could maybe do this interview podcast by yourself.
Okay.
But the idea, you hit the nail on the head. We as caregivers, as an aunt, as a mom, as a dad, as a teacher, we don't want our kids to suffer.
No.
We don't want the kids we care about to go through hardship. And so when we listen, a lot of times we're focused on fixing it, even having an opinion about it, versus realizing that we probably can't solve it. They probably are going to suffer a little bit. And what youth really need is someone who's going to walk through it with them. Not fix it, because we can't.
Right.
But say, I'm here with you, we're walking through it with you. And that is empathy, right? So this idea of, I can't fix it. I can't give you a solution. You probably don't even want me to, right?
Right.
But I'm here with you. Which means I'm going to listen and try not to have a judgment, right?
Okay.
I'm not going to say, well, don't be mad. They weren't trying to do that. I'm going to say, you're mad.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Acknowledge the feeling.
Yep. Or don't cry, right? Even those are judgments, and it comes from a good place, right? I want you to be well. But what a youth hears is, I can't cry. It's not okay to be angry. There's no space for my feelings, right? And so listening without judgment, and then, like you said, naming it, right? I hear that you're angry, or it sounds like what they said made you frustrated, right? And then some form of validation. We want to try to stay away from, I understand, because sometimes we don't really understand, and that falls hollow, right? Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. More along the lines of like, that makes sense to me that you would feel that way. Or yeah, with everything going on around you, being overwhelmed sounds like it makes sense. Or other people might feel that way. Or even just a simple like, I hear you, right? Not, I hear you, and now this is what you can do about it. Youth, really, what I hear from youth a lot of the time is they're not looking for a solution. They're looking for voice. So less is more. How can I listen? How can I let them say what they need, knowing I'm not their solution? And then let them know that I'm going to do the best I can to walk through it with them. Sometimes even just saying like, hey, I'm here if you want to talk is enough. Or saying, do you want me to give you some advice right now? Or do you just want me to listen? Those are things that we can start practicing to help youth feel like they, as themselves, have a voice and aren't going to be judged or have a criticism.
I think, and I don't want to push back on your answer, but
Sure.
I want to give you maybe something that I hear from our parents, which is, I think some of our parents, they themselves went through something traumatic.
Yeah.
Whether it was poverty, whether it was bullying, racism, what have you, right? They went through it.
Yeah.
And so they probably made a vow saying, well, my child will never go through that.
Sure.
And so then they tend to overcorrect, overhelp, overfix, without allowing the child to maybe come up with solutions themselves or sit there and think about, okay, well, what is it that I'm really feeling?
Yeah.
Right? Because I've sometimes some of those feelings can get they can spike. They can be really intense, and as a a teenager, I feel like they feel it the most because, as you said, they're developing their frontal lobe cortex. Did I say that right?
Prefrontal cortex, yeah,
Yes.
mostly. You got
Close,
it.
almost there.
Yeah.
But they're developing a part of their brain that analyzes how they should be reacting or how to react, right? And then they felt something that they've never felt before. So obviously that's going to spike, right? Yeah. And so I think here what you gave us, right? Just listening, sitting with your feelings. I think that's great. Sometimes I think as parents, it's tough for us to say, well, we can't fix it.
Yeah.
What do you mean as a parent? I can't, as a caregiver, as a guardian, I can't fix what's going on with my child, right?
Sure,
We refuse to do that. But sometimes the fix is it'll come to you, right?
Yeah.
And so it's important for us to understand that. Now I want to shift a little bit to our teachers, right? Mm-hmm. So, and this was going to be a very intense, probably the most intense question I've asked you, right?
Okay, all right.
So as teachers here at DPS, they're tasked by maintaining their academic responsibilities, right? They're here to teach our students. But they're also in control of their classroom. And so the question here is, what can our teachers do to support our students' mental well-being while still teaching, while still maintaining academic responsibilities?
Yeah. So I love how you prefaced it that way because having been a teacher, I understand that a lot of the difficulty in working through mental well-being or social emotional topics is not the teacher's fault. It's a systemic issue, right? There's not enough space here. There's not enough time. I have to get my kids on reading level. I have to make sure they get to CMAS. I have to make sure they go to college. So I love that you said that because what I don't want is for teachers to feel like I'm faulting them at all for the lack there. I think that's a systemic issue. And what I've seen work really well, I've seen one thing work really well and something I've learned that I think we could practice more in the classroom. The first one, practicing more in the classroom, is it's okay to model as teachers our mental well-being for our youth. Mm-hmm. Not saying that our youth are our therapists. We're not going to go to school and say, this happened, I need you to fix it, right? Or this really hard thing happened. But saying things like, hey, I didn't sleep very well last night, 5 extra minutes of rereading time, right? Mm-hmm. Or we're going to have a slower transition time. Or when you guys stopped listening to me and started talking over me, I felt frustrated. Can we take a minute to breathe? Mm-hmm. Now I'm modeling that I'm human. It's normal to have fluctuation in my mental well-being and how I feel. And this is how I'm going to deal with it. And we're doing that together. I think the more we can name that and model that, the better. I got home sad yesterday and I called a friend. Things like that really help youth see that as adults, we're still working through this too.
Sure.
The other piece that I've seen work really well in classrooms, whether that be in kindergarten classrooms or in high school classrooms, is having a space to name how we're doing. Some teachers will just go around the room and say, how are you feeling today? And then maybe ask, okay, what can we do to support you in that? So if a youth says, I'm feeling frustrated, overwhelmed, the question is, what can we do to support you in that? Mm-hmm. In a kindergarten class once, a kiddo said, I'm feeling nervous or scared. And when they asked what they could do, he said, I need a dance party. So they had a minute to dance, right?
How cute.
Yeah.
How cute.
So, there's some things we can't do in the classroom, but there are some things that we can be like, hey, I need you to be just maybe talk softer today or not be on my case as my friends as much, things like that. I also have been I was recently in a meeting where we talked about, instead of saying this is how I feel emotionally, we talked about what is our weather today. So am I a sunny day? Is it a little rainy? Is there a tornado? And just giving kids language around, one, it's normal to have all spectrum of emotions. And then, okay, how can we support you in that? That's a way to help us learn that these fluctuations are normal, and we do, and it's okay to prioritize them as a group.
I feel like as adults, we need to have these in all of our meetings.
Yeah.
Because there'll be days where I'm cranky. Mm-hmm. It's well, why am I cranky? What is bothering me? And so if we took the time to, level set, and I've been in meetings. So we have a department here who deals with social emotional health.
Yeah.
And almost every single time I've had a meeting with them, they do a check-in like that.
Yep.
Right. And so for those of us listening, our social emotional health, it talks about the whole child, right? So if let me break this down, right? Mm-hmm. If our goal at Denver Public Schools is to make sure that our students get a world-class education, that they are prepared for career or college, right? That means that we have to address, as the system, we have to address everything about the child, right? Because if we give them the best, let's say we set it up everything. We have the best tests, the best books, best classrooms, best teachers, but we don't address how they're feeling, how they're dealing with, outside factors, If we don't address these things or don't provide services, how can we expect them to learn? Right? The environment has been set up correctly, right? And we're just talking about environment, physical. Let's talk about just physical environment. But we don't have. They didn't eat that day. Right? They didn't eat that day.
Right.
And so how can we expect them to perform? I see it all the time in elementary schools. I want to say, and even in high schools, there's like a snack cart in the front office at all times. Right? At all times. And kids will come in, grab a snack and leave. And it's kind of part of the culture now here at Denver Public Schools. But that's just one thing. Like, it's so subtle. It's so small. I don't think anyone is talking about it. Honestly, I might be the first one outside of their school building to say something like that. But that's just addressing. And the reason why is that I talk about that is because that's something that, from my experience, right? I know what it was like to be in the classroom with my stomach gurgling and being so embarrassed. It's like, oh, he didn't eat. Why is your stomach gurgling, right? Like, kids would say that to me. But I didn't understand English, so I didn't really hear it.
There's a benefit to everything, I guess.
So that was the silver lining. But I put myself in our students' shoes, and we are doing great things, right? Because we're providing them with podcasts like this. We're giving them the stuff, the resources that they need. Before we leave, Kat, and this has been a pleasure. I just want to say, like, I really enjoy having you on the show. Before we leave, can we talk about resources? Can you recommend anything for our audience so that they can learn more about how they can support our youth and their mental well-being?
I'll start with just an easy resource that's easy to access for youth or families. It's called NAMI, NAMI, Denver.org. I believe that's it. I'll get it to you afterwards to make sure we can share it.
And we'll put it in our show notes.
Basically, it just goes through what youth are facing, especially teens, what teens are facing, what kinds of difficulties they might be having, and how we can support them in a really simple way. It's in English and Spanish and other languages as well. That's a really great, easy, accessible way to sort of access how to support youth. And then the other thing I'd say is there's so many organizations in Denver that are supporting youth and families with this very thing. Vuela for Health is one of them that's teaching or working with families around what is well-being in the family look like. What are our family values? What are limits? And that's all in Spanish, a great organization. Convivia Colorado works with immigrants from any country around telling their story and pride in their story, which brings us to identity and belonging again, right? And which is a really big, important thing for our mental health, for youth mental health. Homies Unidos can work with youth that have been through any sort of violence, right? They work with healing circles a lot as well. Let's see, there's another one that I'm, again, blanking on, but those are some that I think are really, they're helpful. And CHIC is another one, Collaborative Health in Community, and that's a Black-run organization that goes into DPS schools and talks about power and well-being to youth of color. A lot of times using their own culture, things like, what's my chick sauce? Like, what vibe am I bringing in? Or having a dance party, things that kind of fit more into the culture of those students. And so those are some orgs that I think it's helpful to know about because these are other ways that parents or teachers can support our youth and saying, like, hey, this is a really great place that can also support you in your journey.
And for the folks who are listening and really resonated with the message that you have, how can they get connected with you? How can they get connected with the organization that you represent? Yeah,
so I love to talk to community about this. It's my job. So they can always call me. My number is 720-974-7234. They can also email me, which is just K and then Lovejoy, LOVEJOY at denvercac.org. And then our general number, which I don't know off the top of my head, if they have other questions around therapy or abuse and neglect, they can always find on the website and give us a call as well.
And for our listeners, we'll put all of that in our show notes so that you have access to it and then you can connect. One quick final question. At what point did you change your last name to Lovejoy?
I didn't. That's a question I get a lot. I don't actually. I've researched where it came from. It's, as you can probably guess, it's English, but it the story is that it either came for people who are very joyful and happy, or it was a joke and they called people Lovejoy when they weren't joyful and happy.
Oh.
I'm hoping it's the latter. But I didn't change it. I was born with it. Maybe we were the first hippies. I don't know, but that's where it's my last name.
Right on. Well, thank you so much, Kat. Really enjoyed having you here on the show.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Always a pleasure.
Well, friends and families, this concludes our Educa DPS podcast for today. And I want to thank Kat Lovejoy for this very informative conversation. I also want to thank all of our DPS friends and families for checking out this episode. A lot of resources went into this episode, so we appreciate your support and hope that you learned something very valuable. I encourage you all to have a conversation with the young people in your lives and check in with them regarding how they are feeling about their mental health, mental well-being, and let them know that they are seen and that they are valued. Please continue to support us by sharing this content with your friends, with your family. You can find us on all of the major podcast platforms under the DPS Podcast Network. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel at Denver Public Schools Plus. My name is Javier Ibarra. It was a pleasure. See you next time.